Job, Part 1, 3. Perhaps blessings need a longer time than curses for their fulfillment. 10 years had passed since Menuchim uttered his first and only word. He could never yet say another. Sometimes, when Deborah was alone in the house with her sick son, she would bolt the door, sit down beside Menuchim, and stare into the little boy's face. Her thoughts went back to the fearful summer day when the Countess had driven up before the church. Deborah looks into the open portal of the church. A golden radiance from 1,000 candles, from colorful, light-garlanded paintings, from 3 priests in regalia with black beards and white floating hands, standing at the altar deep and far away, floods into the sallow, sun-washed, dusty square. Deborah is in her 3rd month. Menuchim is stirring in her belly. Lithe little Miriam holds fast to her hand. All at once a cry goes up. It drowns out the song of the supplicants in the church. The horse's brittle clopping can be heard. A cloud of dust swirls upward. The Countess' dark blue carriage stops before the church. The peasant children cheer. The beggars on the steps, men and women, hobble toward the barouche to kiss the Countess' hand. All at once Miriam breaks free. She's gone in a trice, vanished. Deborah trembles, turns cold in the engulfing heat. Where is Miriam? She asks every peasant child. The Countess has got down. Deborah steps up quite near the barouche. The coachman with silver buttons in dark blue livery sits so high he can survey everything. "Have you seen a little dark girl running?" Deborah asks, her head tilted upwards, eyes blinded by the radiance of the sun and of the liveried man. With his white-gloved left hand the coachman points to the church. Miriam ran in there. Deborah reflects an instant, then rushes into the church, inward into the golden radiance, into the swelling song, into the clamor of the organ. Miriam is standing in the vestibule. Deborah seizes the child, drags her to the square, runs down the hot, white-scorching steps, flees as if before a burning brand. She wants to slap the child, but she's afraid. She runs, drawing the child behind her, into a narrow street. Now she feels calmer. "You mustn't tell your father anything about this," she gasps. "You hear me, Miriam?" From this day Deborah knows a calamity is on its way. She is carrying a calamity in her womb. She knows and keeps silent. She throws the bolt open. There is a knocking at the door. Mendel is there. His beard is prematurely gray. Deborah's face, body, and hands were also prematurely faded. Strong and slow as a bear was Jonas, the elder son. Wily and nimble as a fox, Shemaria, the younger. Coquettish and thoughtless as a gazelle, Miriam, the sister. So as she scurried through the streets, running her errands, slim and slight, a shimmering shadow, a swarthy face, a large red mouth, a golden yellow shawl knotted under her chin in 2 bobbing wings, and the 2 old eyes amid the swarthy youth of her face. She fell into the garrison officers' field of vision and stayed stuck in their carefree, pleasure-seeking heads. Many stalked her at times. She came to know nothing more of her hunters than what she could perceive directly through the outward gaze of her senses. A silver jangling and rattling of spurs and weapons, a wafting scent of hair cream and shaving soap, a gaudy gleam of gold buttons, silver braid, and blood-red Russia-leather belts. It was little, it was enough. Curiosity, sister of youth, harbinger of desire, lurked right behind the outward gates of Miriam's senses. In sweet, hot fear the girl fled before her pursuers. Only in order to relish the painful, exciting enjoyment of fear, dragging out the minutes, she fled through various streets. She scampered away by circuitous routes. Only that she might flee again, Miriam left the house frequently as need demanded. On street corners she halted and threw a backward glance, bait for hunters. These were Miriam's only pleasures. Even had someone who might have understood her been within reach, she would have kept her mouth sealed, for pleasures are keener the longer they're kept secret. Miriam still did not know what threatening relationship she was bound to encounter in the strange and startling military world, and how heavy were the destinies that were already beginning to gather over the heads of Mendel Singer, his wife and children. For Jonas and Shemarya were now at the age when by law they should become soldiers, and by their forefathers' tradition they must escape that duty. A more merciful and prescient God had provided other young men with a bodily affliction which little impeded them and protected them from evil. Some were one-eyed, some limped, one had a hernia, another twitched for no reason in arms and legs, a few had weak lungs, others weak hearts. This one was hard of hearing, and that one stuttered, and a third one's body was simply quite weak all over. In Mendel Singer's family, however, it seemed as if little Menuchim had taken on the full quota of human ailments, which otherwise perhaps a generous nature would kindly have distributed among all its members. Mendel's older sons were healthy, no fault could be discovered in their bodies, and they must begin to torment themselves, fast and drink coffee, and hope for a temporary weakness of heart, although the war with Japan had already ended. And so their torments began. They didn't eat, didn't sleep, reeled weak and trembling for days and nights on end. Their eyes were bloodshot and swollen, their necks lean and their heads heavy. Deborah loved them again. She peregrinated once more to the cemetery to pray for her elder sons. This time she beseeched an illness for Jonas and Shemarya, as she had earlier implored Menuchim's health. Military service rose up before her worried eyes as a solid mountain of slippery ice and excruciating ordeals. She saw corpses, nothing but corpses. Tall and gleaming, his spur-clad feet set in red blood, the Tsar sat and awaited the sacrifice of her sons. They would go on maneuvers. This alone was her greatest fright. She never once thought of a new war. She raged against her husband. Mendel Singer, what was he? A teacher, a stupid teacher of stupid children. She had had something else in mind when she was still a girl. By the same token, Mendel Singer fared no better in his trouble than his wife. On the Sabbath in the synagogue, when the legally prescribed prayer for the Tsar was recited, Mendel thought of his sons' near future. He saw them now in the hated drill uniforms of fresh recruits. They ate pork and officers beat them with riding crops. They carried rifles and bayonets. He often sighed for no conceivable reason, in the course of prayers, in the course of classes, in the course of silence. Even strangers saw he was worried. No one had ever asked him about his infirm son, but now everyone inquired about the healthy ones. On the 26th day of March, finally, the two brothers traveled to Targi. Both their lots came up. Both were irreproachably healthy. Both were enlisted. They were permitted to spend one more summer at home. In spring they were to report for duty. One Wednesday they became soldiers. On Sunday they went back home. On Sunday they went back home, furnished with complimentary state tickets. Now they traveled at the Tsar's expense. Many of their sort were traveling with them. It was a slow train. They sat among peasants on wooden benches. The peasants sang and got drunk. They all smoked black tobacco, whose smoke bore with it a faint suggestion of sweat. They all told each other stories. Jonas and Shemarya did not separate for a moment. It was their first rail journey. They changed places frequently. Each of them wanted to sit a while at the window and look out at the landscape. To Shemarya the world seemed immensely wide. In Jonas' eyes it was flat. It bored him. The train traveled smoothly through the flat land like a sled over snow. The fields showed in the windows. Gaily dressed peasant girls waved. When they emerged in groups, the peasant boys in the car answered them with a threatening howl. Dark, bashful, and worried, the two Jews sat among them, pushed into the corner by the bravado of the drunks. "I'd like to be a peasant," Jonas suddenly said. "Not me," replied Shemarya. "I'd like to be a peasant," Jonas repeated. "I'd like to get drunk and sleep with those girls." "I want to be what I am," said Shemarya, "a Jew like my father Mendel Singer, not a soldier, and sober." "I'm a little glad to be a soldier," said Jonas. "You'll soon see how glad you are. I'd like to be a rich man and see life." "What's life?" "Life," Shemarya explained, "is seeing big cities. The streetcars go down the middle of the streets. All the shops are as big as our police station, and the display windows are even bigger. I've seen postcards. You don't need a door to go into an office. The windows reach down to the floor." "Hey, why are you two so glum?" a peasant called suddenly from the opposite corner. Jonas and Shemarya pretended not to hear him, or that his question was not meant for them. They had it in their blood to turn a deaf ear if a peasant addressed them. For 1,000 years, if a peasant asked and a Jew answered, no good could come of it. "Hey!" said the peasant, and got to his feet. Jonas and Shemarya stood up together. "Yeah, you, Jews, I'm talking to you," said the peasant. "Haven't you had anything to drink?" "I've already drunk something," said Shemarya. "Not me," said Jonas. The peasant pulled out a bottle he had been carrying at his chest under his jacket. It was warm and slippery and smelled more strongly of the peasant than of its contents. Jonas put it to his mouth. He revealed his full blood-red lips. His strong white teeth could be seen at either side of the brown bottle. Jonas drank and drank. He didn't feel his brother's admonishing hand tugging lightly at his sleeve. He held the bottle with both hands like a gigantic infant. At his upraised elbow his shirt shone whitish through the thin, threadbare fabric. His Adam's apple rose and fell under the skin of his neck, as constant as a piston in a machine. A low, smothered gurgling bubbled out of his throat. They all watched how the Jew drank. Jonas was done. The empty bottle fell out of his hands and into his brother Shemarya's lap. He sank after it as if he must take the same way. The peasant reached out his hand and mutely requested the bottle back from Shemarya. Then for a moment he lightly shook sleeping Jonas' broad shoulders with his boot. They came to Podvorsk. Here they had to get off. It was 7 versts to Jurki. The brothers were forced to hike it, no telling whether someone along the way would give them a lift on a cart. All the travelers helped heavy Jonas to his feet. When he was standing outside, he sobered up again. They hiked. It was night. They glimpsed the moon behind milky clouds. In the snowfields, solitary, irregularly contoured patches of earth darkened like the mouths of craters. Spring seemed to float towards them out of the forest. Jonas and Shemarya walked quickly along a narrow track. They heard the delicate crackling of thin, brittle sheets of ice under their boots. They carried their plump white bundles shouldered on canes. Shemarya tried once to start a conversation with his brother. Jonas did not answer. He was ashamed because he had got drunk and fallen down like a peasant. At the places where the path was so narrow that both brothers could not walk side by side, Jonas let the younger take the lead. He would have liked to let Shemarya go on ahead of him. Where the way widened, he slowed his pace in the hope that Shemarya would carry on without waiting for his brother. But it was as if the younger feared to lose the elder. Since he had seen that Jonas was capable of getting drunk, he no longer trusted him. He doubted the elder's good sense. He felt he was responsible for the elder. Jonas intuited what his brother was ruminating. A great foolish disdain welled in his heart. Shemarya is ridiculous, thought Jonas. He's thin as a rail. He can't even hold up the cane. He shoulders it farther and farther back. The bundle's going to fall in the muck any time now. Imagining that Shemarya's white bundle might fall from the smooth cane into the black muck of the road, Jonas laughed out loud. "What are you laughing at?" asked Shemarya. "At you," Jonas answered. "I've got more right to laugh at you," said Shemarya. They fell silent again. The forest of firs rose black before them. The silence seemed to come from it, not from themselves. From time to time a wind blew up from any direction whatever, a homeless gust of wind. A willow bush stirred in its sleep. Branches creaked dryly. Clouds ran pale across the heavens. "Now we're really soldiers," said Shemarya suddenly. "Damn right," said Jonas. "What else would we be? We've got no trade. Should we become teachers like our father?" "Better than being a soldier," said Shemarya. "I could be a salesman and travel around the world." "Soldiers are the world too, and I can't be a salesman," Jonas opined. "You're drunk. I'm as sober as you are. I can drink and be sober. I can be a soldier and see the world. I'd like to be a peasant. I'm telling you so, and I'm not drunk." Shemarya shrugged his shoulders. They carried on. Toward morning they heard cocks crowing at distant farms. "That must be Yurki," said Shemarya. "No, it's Bitok," said Jonas. "Bitok my ass," said Shemarya. A wagon clattered and rattled beyond the next bend in the road. The morning was pallid as the night had been. No difference between sun and moon. Snow began to fall, soft, warm snow. Ravens flew up and cawed. "Look at the birds," said Shemarya, only as a pretext to placate his brother. "Those are ravens," said Jonas. "Birds," he mimicked mockingly. "My ass," said Shemarya. "Ravens?" It was Bitok, in fact. One more hour and they would be home. It snowed thicker and softer the further the day progressed, as if the snow were falling from the ascending sun. After a few minutes all the country was white. As well the isolated willows along the way and the scattered birch groves between the fields. White, white, white. Only the two striding young Jews were dark. The snow heaped up on them too, but seemed to melt more quickly on their backs. Their long black overcoats flapped. The skirts knocked with a sharp, regular beating against the tops of their high leather boots. The thicker it snowed, the faster they walked. Peasants who came toward them were walking quite slowly with sagging knees. They turned white. The snow lay on their broad shoulders as if on thick boughs, heavy and light at the same time. Intimate with the snow, they walked into it as into their homeland. Sometimes they stood stock still and looked around at the two dark men as at unwonted apparitions, although to them the sight of Jews was nothing strange. They approached their house out of breath. Twilight was already coming on. From far off they heard the sing-song of the studying children. It came toward them, a maternal sound, a paternal word. It bore their whole childhood toward them. It signified and contained everything they had seen, learned, smelled, and felt since the hour of birth, the sing-song of the studying children. It contained the aroma of hot, tasty meals, the black and white gleam that emerged from their father's beard and face, the reverberation of their mother's sighs and Menuchim's whispering, Mendel Singer's prayerful evening whisperings, a million unnameable, common, and exceptional happenings. Both brothers responded then with the same movements to the melody that floated toward them through the snow as they neared the paternal home. Their hearts beat with the same rhythm. The door flew open before them. Through the window their mother, Deborah, had long since seen them coming. "We're enlisted," said Jonas without a greeting. At once a frightful silence fell over the room, where even now the children's voices had sounded, a limitless silence many times more massive than the space which had become its prey, and yet it was born from the little word "enlisted," which Jonas had just pronounced. Halfway through a word they had memorized, the children broke off the lesson. Mendel, who had been meandering back and forth about the room, stood stock still, looked into the air, raised his arms and let them sink back down. Their mother Deborah sat down on one of the two stools which always stood near the stove, as if she had long anticipated the opportunity to play a grieving mother. Miriam, the daughter, had drawn back gropingly into the corner. Her heart was beating loudly. She thought everyone must hear it. The children sat glued to their places. Their legs in gaily striped woolen stockings, which they had been swinging incessantly throughout the lesson, hung lifeless under the table. Outside it was snowing incessantly, and the soft white of the snowflakes poured a pale gleaming through the window into the room and onto the faces of the silent. Several times they heard the charred embers crackling in the stove, and a faint creaking of the doorposts when the wind flung itself against them. The canes still on their shoulders, the white bundles still on the canes, the two brothers stood at the door, heralds of misfortune and its children. Suddenly Deborah cried, "Mendel, go run, ask somebody for advice." Mendel stroked his beard. Silence was banished. The children's legs began to swing gently. The brothers laid down their bundles and approached the table. "What kind of nonsense are you talking?" said Mendel Singer. "Where should I go? And who should I ask for advice? Who helps a poor teacher? And what would they use to help me? What help do you expect from other people when God has cursed us?" Deborah did not answer. She remained sitting a while quite still on the stool. Then she stood up, kicked him with her foot like a dog, so that he staggered back with a thud, grabbed her brown shawl, which had been lying on the floor like a hillock of wool, wrapped it around her head and neck, knotted the fringes sharply at the nape with a raging motion, as if she wanted to strangle herself, turned red in the face, stood there hissing as if filled with boiling water, and suddenly spat, firing white spittle like a poisoned bullet before Mendel Singer's feet. And as if with that alone she had not sufficiently demonstrated her contempt, she sent yet another cry after the spittle, which sounded like "Pfui!" but could not be fully understood. Before her astonished audience could compose themselves, she banged the door open. A vicious gust of wind spilled white snowflakes into the room, blew into Mendel Singer's face, grasped the children by their hanging legs. Then the door slammed shut again. Deborah was gone. She ran directionless through the narrow streets. Ever down the middle, a dark brown colossus, went raving through the white snow till she sank into it. She got tangled in her clothes, got up with amazing agility, ran farther, still not knowing whither, but for her it was as if her feet ran on their own to a destination that her head still did not know. Twilight fell faster than the snowflakes. The first yellow lights were shining. Scattered figures who ventured out of the house to close the shutters swiveled their heads after Deborah and stared after her a long time, although they were freezing. Deborah ran in the direction of the cemetery. As she reached the small wooden lattice, she fell down again. She gathered herself up. The gate would not budge. Snow had jammed it shut. Deborah threw her shoulders against the lattice. Now she was inside. The wind howled about the graves. Today the dead seemed deader than ever. Night rose quickly out of the twilight, black and shot through with light from the snow. Deborah lowered herself before one of the tombstones in the first row. With numbed fists she rubbed it free of snow, as if she wished to make sure that her voice would more easily penetrate to the dead soul if the muffling stratum between her prayer and the ear of the blessed were wiped away. And then a cry broke from Deborah, a sound as from a horn where a human heart has been installed. That cry was heard throughout the town, but was instantly forgotten, for the quiet that followed after it was heard no more. Deborah gasped out only a faint whimpering at brief intervals, a faint motherly whimpering, which the night devoured, which the snow interred, and which only the dead could hear.